your right to contraception. We must protect all forms of birth control. So we're here with a giant IUD because we face a huge threat from Republican lawmakers and their extremist allies. We are one radical right-wing Supreme Court decision from having our freedoms stripped away. 8 in 10 voters support the right to contraception or birth control, but Republican senators, including Marco Rubio and Rick Scott, blocked it in the U.S. Senate, and extremist legislators in Tallahassee blocked Florida's right to contraception vote. So to hear more about that, we've got a great lineup of speakers, and it's my pleasure to introduce Congresswoman Kathy Castor.
Well, thank you, Laura. Good morning, buenas tardes. I'm Tampa-based Congresswoman Kathy Castor. You know, I wake up every day grateful to live in America where we are free. We are free to choose our pathways in life. We are free to build our own business. We're free under a free enterprise system. We're free to grow a family when we would like to grow a family. And every generation of Americans has strengthened our freedoms, whether it's been through civil rights, through voting rights, through equal rights, except 2 years ago. 2 years ago, the United States Supreme Court issued a radical and extreme ruling that took us backwards. The court overturned Roe versus Wade, a 50-year precedent that established the freedom, the reproductive rights and freedoms of women to determine whether to have a family and when to have a family. Did you all know that Florida Senator Rick Scott celebrated the overturning of Roe v. Wade and the ripping away of our reproductive freedoms and rights? This is something I don't think many Floridians quite understand, how radical Rick Scott has been over the years. He supports the fallout from overturning Roe v. Wade, abortion bans, now the 6-week abortion ban in Florida that is so costly and cruel to women and doctors and families. But there was something in that Dobbs decision from 2 years ago that should sound an alarm all across the state of Florida. And that was what Supreme Court Justice Clarence Thomas said. He said that we need to go farther, that the Griswold versus Connecticut that established the right to contraceptives in America should be re-examined. So what did we do in the Congress? At that time, Democrats were in control of the House of Representatives, and we got to work to pass a Right to Contraceptives Act to make sure that women and families had access to affordable contraceptives and that doctors could prescribe contraceptives. Rick Scott has voted twice against the Right to Contraceptives Act. In the United States Senate and in the United States House, since the extreme MAGA Republicans have taken control, they have targeted contraceptives for elimination, make them more expensive and harder to get. And to add insult to injury now, we know that there is a move afoot to outlaw in vitro fertilization. And while Rick Scott has said, oh no, he supports in vitro fertilization, his record does not match his rhetoric. Twice now, he has voted to block the right to in vitro fertilization. So Rick Scott, we're not going to let you get away with it. Some people would call him a hypocrite. I'll go ahead and do that and say Rick Scott is a hypocrite. He says one thing, but he votes the other way. But I want folks to know all across this great state, we're going to stand up for your reproductive freedoms. We're going to stand up for your rights to contraceptives, the right to determine when you are going to have a family. If you're going to have a family, it's your decision, not the government's. And I want to introduce one of our champions in Tallahassee, a young woman, an environmental scientist who stands up for all of us and has been on the front lines fighting against Florida's costly and cruel abortion ban, my good friend, State Representative Lindsay Cross.
Good morning, friends. I'm State Representative Lindsay Cross from District 60 in Pinellas County. And I want to start by acknowledging that it has been a brutal few years for women in Florida. Our deepest fears were realized when the U.S. Supreme Court overturned Roe v. Wade just 2 short years ago, after being the law of the land for 50 years. And just a few weeks ago, our fears were realized again when the Florida Supreme Court decision triggered the near total abortion ban passed by extremists in Tallahassee. I distinctly remember when the abortion ban passed. I was there in committee and heard the testimony of distraught women and their partners that had traveled hundreds of miles across the state to plead with their legislators to not pass that bill. Now those women and their partners will have to travel thousands of miles to get access to life-saving health care. As one of the few states in the South that provided comprehensive reproductive health care, not only did Floridians lose their freedoms, but women in nearby states will suffer from a stranglehold on safe reproductive health care. Even more disheartening is that the attacks haven't stopped. Now it's IVF and basic contraception. As a student and a young adult, I had the privilege of comprehensive sex education in my local public schools, a trusted doctor, and the access to contraception. I had the freedom to make decisions to protect my health and to make those decisions that were right for me. The ability to plan if and when to start a family is one of the most empowering things that we can give to future generations. And it is also one of the most personal and one that should never be made by politicians. Similarly, IVF is a medical miracle that is transforming lives in the best possible way, allowing people to start and grow their families. I have so many friends and family members that have relied on IVF, from traditional families, queer couples, and even single women that had always dreamed of becoming a parent. It is a gift that politicians must not take away. But underlying all of this is a desire to control women's bodies, to control women's futures, and to control women's freedoms. We simply won't stand for it, and we will fight tooth and nail to get back our freedoms, to protect our reproductive rights, and to ensure that every young girl growing up in this great state, in this great country, has the freedom to live her life with liberty and to pursue her own happiness and prosperity. I'm so grateful to have a fighter alongside of me up in the Florida State House, our Tampa Representative Susan Valdés.
Thank you, Representative Cross, and good morning, everyone. I am Susan Valdés, your state representative for District 64 in the Florida House. And we're here because women's reproductive freedoms are under attack. Specifically, we are here to confront the lack of leadership and targeted assault on women's reproductive health by Senator Rick Scott and his Republican allies. From every level of government, Republican elected officials have systematically dismantled women's rights. Their message to our sisters, daughters, friends, and loved ones is very clear. Our right to our own body doesn't matter. It is heartbreaking that here today, that in 2024, women in the United States have fewer rights than when I was a little girl. In June of 2022, the U.S. Supreme Court overturned Roe versus Wade, a radical decision that upended decades of legal precedent and dismantled federal protections for women's reproductive rights. Since then, nearly 24 states have banned or severely curtailed access to women's reproductive health care rights, including abortion. Studies show that states with such draconian restrictions report higher rates of maternal and infant mortality and greater economic insecurities. My friends, every legislative session in Tallahassee since 2018, we have seen stripping away of women's rights. On May 1st, Florida's 6 weeks abortion ban went into effect. Senator Rick Scott said that he'd sign the bill himself if he were governor. Well, thank God he's not governor, but we got a choice, right? Rick Scott is fully behind Florida's abortion ban, which bans the procedure before most women know they're even pregnant, with virtually no exceptions. The 6-week abortion ban leaves women in Florida in a place of uncertainty where they must, quote unquote, figure it out. Their options are grim and very daunting, traveling out of state, seeking unsafe alternatives, carrying to term when they have no viable choice. With a radical and politicized U.S. Supreme Court and complicit Republican officials, rights can be stripped away in an instant. Justices and legal scholars have indicated that the same rationale used in overturning Roe v. Wade could be applied to other cases, such as the Griswold v. Connecticut, which guaranteed access to contraceptives for American women. They will not stop in limiting just abortion and those reproductive rights. They will push their extremist agenda in controlling women's bodies as far as they can. It is imperative to ensure that contraceptives remains protected, not only just for the decision of when you want to have a family, but these medications also help with women's health, period. Sometimes birth control helps women with their monthly menses, which is a natural aspect of women. And we must understand that politicians are not physicians. And those physicians that are in the state house, I tend to wonder where they got their degrees. So, during this legislation, 2024 Florida legislative session, we introduced bill to access to contraception bill was introduced but never received a hearing. Never received a hearing. I stand before you today to implore you to, as an American citizen, your duty, it's not a right, my friends, it's a duty to vote in every single election, not just the presidential, not just the governor's election, but every single election. Your local elections are so important. And as Americans, it is not our right. It is our duty. This is how we are able to preserve our founding fathers' vision of a government by the people and for the people. We also have in the state of Florida an opportunity to vote on Amendment 4. Not going to tell you how to vote, but make sure that you understand that women's rights are on the ballot. And Amendment 4 will restore some of those rights back to women. The fight is real, my friends. I cannot believe that in 2024 we're having these types of conversations. We stand on the shoulders of women who stood out in the streets back in the late 60s, early 70s, fighting for these very same causes. And to see us go back in time, it's just so sad, so sad. We must continue to fight, and alongside the fight, it's my pleasure to introduce to you current County Commissioner Pat Kemp, candidate for House of Representatives, District 15. There you go, Pat. It's all yours.
Good morning. Not only did Senator Rick Scott celebrate the overturn of Roe v. Wade, but I am the Democratic nominee for U.S. House 15, where Laurel Lee is now serving. She as well celebrated the overturn of Roe v. Wade and now is silent in protecting women in Florida and women across the nation. We're all proud to host the IUD Express here in Tampa and Hillsborough County today because we're sending a message in overwhelming numbers that the people of this county, state, and country support the right to contraception and reproductive freedom. In overwhelming numbers, women and men across Tampa Bay and Florida will not tolerate politicians and judges who think they should be the deciders about whether, how, when, or under what circumstances we decide to grow families. Senator Rick Scott has decided over and over again, and so has Representative Laurel Lee, that the very personal choices we make about our reproduction is his choice, not ours. And the reproductive health care we have access to is his choice, not ours. I have to tell you, there's more than a little irony here for me today to see what I consider our statue of reproductive liberty here in Gaslight Park. Because Rick Scott and the Republicans have been shameless in their attempts to gaslight, cover up, lie, and misrepresent their records to the people of Florida. Rick Scott isn't standing up now for how he actually voted. And by the way, neither is Laurel Lee, because he knows that a huge majority of Floridians don't agree with his extremist ban on contraception and reproductive freedom for women and families. Rick Scott has a long record of voting against protecting access to contraception and IVF treatment, and he's now pouring millions of dollars that he got as CEO, ironically, of HCA Columbia, that was slapped with a $1.7 billion fine. You've all heard that history for Medicare fraud. And then he was pushed out, but he left with hundreds of millions of dollars. So he's using those millions to gaslight and run ads now saying he actually supported IVF when he voted against it. So no more. In 7 states, including Kansas, Montana, and Ohio, the people have voted to restore reproductive freedom. And this November, the people of Florida will do the same with Amendment 4 on the ballot in November. And they'll also have their opportunity with politicians like Rick Scott on the ballot and Laurel Lee, who have clearly and repeatedly voted against reproductive access for women and families. We'll all have the opportunity to vote this November and set that to rest. Thank you.
Thank you for being here today. My name's Christina Diamond. I'm the CEO of Ruthless Florida. We're an organization that's dedicated to electing pro-choice women all through the state of Florida. As women, sisters, mothers, wives, so many in our lives have their own abortion stories. We all have our own stories about accessing reproductive health care, and some of the people closest to us have also had to access reproductive health care. Regardless of a person's story or reasons, these are personal medical decisions between patients, doctors, and their families. Since Ruthless was launched, we have elected over 250 women to office at all levels of government. But this is clearly not enough. We have enacted a 15-week abortion ban, and when Republicans decided that that was not cruel enough, they went back and elected to pass a 6-week abortion ban. Let me be clear. This is all a starting point. This is not the end point. Just like every other Republican-controlled state, they are now coming for IVF and birth control. Florida Republicans are out of touch and are determined to roll back time. We have a 6-week ban here in Florida because Republicans don't actually believe in freedom, they don't believe in basic civil rights, and they definitely don't believe in the right to privacy. We are working hard to elect pro-choice women that will give the people of Florida freedom, fundamental rights and the privacy to make their own reproductive health care decisions with their families and their medical professionals. Republicans are completely out of step with the majority of the Florida people. Florida Democrats are the only ones fighting for what Floridians are asking for. We have pro-choice women across the state who are going to get elected this year because they are actually listening to the will of the people. We are at a real crossroads. The nation is watching. Everyone has their eyes on Florida. And the power lies in our hands and the voters in November. We deserve the right to grow our families when we choose, access medical care when we need it, and we deserve to make these decisions in private. It's time that Republicans get out of our personal lives, our bedrooms, and the doctor's office. Let's send a strong message in November that this has gone too far. Next, I'd like to introduce Dr. Shephard.
Thank you, Christine. Hello, everyone. My name is Dr. Bruce Shephard. I'm a retired obstetrician gynecologist, having practiced in Tampa for 40 years and delivering 7,500 babies. I'm immensely proud of my work, helping women and their families. But you know, there were difficult times as well, many. As an OB-GYN, I cared for women whose stories didn't have happy endings, delivered bad news to women who desperately wanted to be mothers, and spent years trying to get pregnant, but were ultimately only to do so through IVF. I also cared for women who became pregnant, but faced tragic complications and heartbreaking decisions. I cared for these women who became pregnant, but ultimately the choice of when and how to become pregnant, and if necessary, the decision to receive abortion care, was theirs alone. Their bodies, their pregnancies, their decision. Politicians like Rick Scott has no business interfering with women's health care. Rick Scott has struck out with me. Strike one was his support for Florida's draconian 6-week abortion ban. Strike two was his vote against contraception. Strike three, his vote against IVF. Clearly, IVF is supported by the majority of women and 80% of Americans. So in my opinion, Senator Scott has struck out. In my 40 years as a physician, I've seen a lot of health care legislation, but nothing like what we're seeing today. The attacks on reproductive freedom. And it's extreme Republicans like Scott who've mentored this. The vast majority of docs, physicians like me, oppose restrictions on reproductive health care. Scott's opposition to access to contraception strikes at the very heart of preventive care. Birth control, really? I find it appalling. Scott's position on abortion, contraception, and IVF is completely out of step with modern health care, an unholy trinity of bad politics. I would go on to say that the economic impacts of Scott's actions are also to be noted and have impacts especially on minority communities. So make no mistake, Rick Scott is a major pillar of Florida's dangerous anti-reproductive care reality, and he should be held accountable for his disastrous effects on women's health. His extreme policies have no business in my hospital, and he has no business in the Senate. Thank you.
Thank you, everybody, for joining us on our IUD Express tour stop in Tampa. We're here to protect protection and fight for your right to birth control. And we'll be on to Tallahassee on Monday. Thank you all.